I just finished The Warrior Prophet, the second book in the Prince of Nothing Trilogy. This book picks up right where The Darkness That Comes Before left off and follows 3 consecutive marches south by the Holy War as they move inexorably closer to Shemeh. Is that how you pronounce it? Shemeh, their ancient Holy Land. So, Israel, I guess. What follows is another stunning entry in the series, as the Holy War is embroiled in multiple climactic battles, infected by a manipulative third party who is taking advantage of the war for his own agenda, and also internal political conflicts that are inherent to any war. This book is a step up from the last in terms of pacing, character, world building, and twists, providing compelling motivation to move right on to the next book. As characters are the most important part of the story, I will start by talking about that aspect. For each of them, I think they have been developed in interesting ways, or they are allowed to shine in amazing ways. Achamian goes through hell and back, both mentally and physically, and repeatedly, and perhaps he doesn't necessarily come back in every respect either. But he also has one of the best hype moments in the series, which he is figuratively pushed up against the wall, and which is just awesome. Kellis and his abilities are on steroids and even seems godlike at points, but Baker still manages to undercut this with key hints of, humanity and fallibility within him. Emphasis on hints, however. Nair also demonstrates himself to have many interesting layers, with twists that take him in both sympathetic and darker directions. Asmonette still strikes me as a bit sidelined in the story, so I'm interested in what Baker will do with her in the last entry. As for the side characters, Proyas and Confus both fulfilled their roles, even though I thought they were not featured in the story to the degree that I wanted. Proyas' character continues in his complexity that was indicated in the first book, while Confus cleverly spins things for his ends and remains one of the more formidable foes. Sabin, someone I don't remember from the first book, comes into his own in this book as well, playing a major part in one of the best sequences in the book. Both books in a series are fairly slow and deliberate, but this book is much faster paced than the first as it follows the Holy War and its campaign south, rather than the moments leading up to the beginning of the war. The story is broken up into 3 parts, with each part featuring a climactic battle at a specific location. And true to the essence of political scheming that is imbibed within the story, the Warrior Prophet continues the machinations leading up to and within and after each of the battles. As has always been the case, war is politics and politics is war, and Baker weaves that into the story perfectly. I think the first battle was my favorite of the batch, teeming as it is with spastic energy and religious fervor. From the outset, I thought it was going to be one way, and then I wasn't so sure, and then I realized I wouldn't be able to tell until the very last moments. If the idea of religious fanatics waging a holy war appeals to you in any way, then this first battle is a must-read. The second battle was also stunning, showing some of the key characters I mentioned above at their best. I also loved how Baker defined the character of each side of the battle, and how that influenced the fighting. It gave the fighting personality and showed that Baker was interested in more than people throwing punches. The final sequence is more than just a battle, but a sequence of fighting, political intrigue, desperation, and is, all around, one of the better parts of the book. It starts with a grueling sequence where the Holy War is plunged into its most desperate state. And then they are trapped in another sense, and they are just as desperate. And the intrigue and infighting that erupts from the dire straits was what settled the book for me. All around, it was exciting, and it rounded off the story perfectly. The prose was excellent, just like the first book. I think the only gripe was that there were some parts of the story, and they were very rare, where I had to read a sentence or two twice to understand what Baker was saying. The mysteries were also expanded upon in interesting ways, though I can't say anything in the non-spoiler section. Overall, I thought the book was amazing. I will give it a 9 out of 10. Achamian probably goes through more than any other character in the story. He starts out rather desperate without Esmenet, and struggles with the question of whether he ought to tell his superiors about Kelsa's fulfillment of a prophecy. While he does eventually find Esmenet, he is then subjected to the manipulation of Kellus. He is captured and tortured, and then he is cuckolded by Kellus when he steals Esmenet from him. Even then, Achaemen works to save Kellus, as he believes he is destined to save the world from the apocalypse. Further, he seems to be realizing that Kellus has been playing him, not only because of Esmenet, but because he realizes that Kellus has been able to see the consult, and that many of his questions have been made in this light. Achaemen also goes full badass in this book when he escapes from the clutches of the Scarlet Spires. For me, it starts with his usage of that Waithy doll to free him from the circle that blocks sorcery. I noticed that nothing happened when he said the two words while in the circle. I was inclined to dismiss it as the powers were likely nullified. But then we got that scene with the Waithy doll climbing to the top of the rubble in the library, and I knew that this was the one spell that he risked casting. But the climax was what made all of this worth it. As Achaemen goes on this violent rampage throughout the compound that he's being held in, and tears all opposition to shreds. Kellus was my favorite character in the last book, primarily because of the meticulous manipulation that he undertakes to achieve his ends. In this book, I mentioned that he is basically on steroids. And I think that Baker actually managed to hit a kind of sweet spot, but just barely. There are periods in the story where we only see Kellus from other people's perspectives, and I have to admit, it was almost too much. So many of them are fawning over his character and marveling at how amazing he is. And I remember reading the very beginning and hoping that we would get to see Kellus's perspective again. Just for a breath of air and for more of what we saw before. And thankfully we got to see that. From Kellus's perspective, things are more refreshing as we not only see the extent of his manipulation, but also the ways in which he struggles or makes mistakes. The first battle on the plains of Mengeda was an instructive example, as Kellus had meant to manipulate Sabin into destroying himself in the Shroud Knights, all to eliminate Sorcellus in a way that the consult would not connect back to him in any concrete way. But his miscalculation was seeing Sabin abscond with more than just a portion of the army, but nearly half. In that act, he nearly destroyed the Holy War, even if the fanaticism and the desperate chase that Proteus took on helped Sabin win the battle at the end. One of the best manipulation scenes in this book is when Kellus manipulates Achaemen into losing his faith in the mandate. His use of Inra to subtly influence the sorcerer is dastardly and cruel, and the subtlety of the scene was what made it seem so plausible. Kellus's ultimate goal is to convince Achaemen to teach him the Gnosis, but Kellus goes after that end step by step, starting with questioning the sorcerer's faith in the mandate. And I think a lesser author would have written a manipulation scene in one go, where Kellus would have convinced Achaemen to give up the Gnosis in an interaction or two, with less emphasis on the specifics, because he's just that smart. Baker is subtle enough to show that this is a complicated process and something to be nudged toward over time. And really just comes on to the execution, just what are those steps, just how do you portray it? Baker's really good at making it seem believable. And another angle that I like about the above interaction is that you don't entirely grasp Kellus's ultimate goal at the time either. While reading it, I was thinking that Kellus was aware that Achaemen was toiling over whether to warn the mandate, and he was stepping in to prevent that from happening with as sure a blow as possible. But then you realize that his goals run even deeper than that. Not only is he breaking Achaemen's faith in the mandate, but he is also taking the Gnosis, which is all the more sinister. I also like how Baker handled Kellus's rise to the top at the end of the story. While he has the ability to manipulate and inspire people all throughout the Holy War, there are a number who are immune or less susceptible. And as the March finds itself in its worst moments, he actually ends up splitting the war in two by dividing loyalties. Led by Confus, of course. Many of the nobles are outright hostile to Kellus's rise, and he is forced into a position of submission. He is forced to gamble his own life and risk dying in order to win over the people of the Holy War. In a way, this reminds me of Death Note. A spoiler from Death Note. When Misa is both connected to Light and to the second Kira, L seems on the verge of catching Light. Light is forced to turn himself in while also enacting his most elaborate scheme yet. In both cases, I think sequences both show the limitations and the brilliance of the characters. Kells is shown to be vulnerable enough that he can't just manipulate his way out of a situation, but he also comes out of the sequence looking all the more terrifying. Finally, Kells, while hanging on that circumfix at the end of the story, shows the slightest bit of emotion. He shows that he did care a little bit about Sirway, even if she was ultimately sacrificed in his gambit, and this is something that is suspected after being reminded of Kells' suppressed humanity when he let Nair live after the second battle. Something that I forgot to mention in the first book is that there were slight hints that Kells was not all manipulation, and that he did have some emotional connections to characters, namely when Sirway was being raped by Nair in that first book, where there's a line suggesting that Kells felt something, and Baker has built off of that in key ways in this story. Nair is one of the more interesting characters in the story due to the number of layers he displays throughout. First, I love the idea that he is a barbarian who could never fit in with his tribe. While he ostensibly emanates all the relevant traits to a greater extreme than his tribesmen, he is actually emulating them and compensating for his lacking. And this explains his connection to Sirway, the ownership of whom he uses as his proof that he really is the Sylvandi barbarian that he claims to be. Kells explicitly lays this out in the story and uses the barbarian's connection to Sirway in order to manipulate him. The best part about this, however, is that Kells knows that Nair is aware of the manipulation, but also that Nair cannot help but go along with it because of just how deep-seated his needs are. Nair's connection to Proyas is another dimension. He has no personal connection to the Inrethi people and even has every reason to hate them, but he is still forming these personal bonds with Proyas and is fully aware of what he is doing to him. But beyond that, Nair is also going insane and starting to hallucinate. He is aware of Kells' manipulations of everyone around him and of the barbarian himself. He is aware of his growing connection to the Inrethi people, but he is caught in the knots of indecision. If he stops Kells, does that mean he has embraced the Inrethi people? If he does nothing, can he trust whatever Kells is planning? His brewing insanity only makes you question how he'll turn in the final act of this story. I mentioned that Esmenet seems sidelined in the story. For much of the story, she is either doting on Achamian or being manipulated by Kells. But to be fair, almost everyone is. And I don't think her place in the story is as well realized as the others. I'm still holding out that she will have a greater part to play as the pieces seem to have been laid out for us, and I have heard that it comes out over the course of the story, so we'll see how that comes around. After writing this, I started reading the recap of the Warrior Prophet provided at the beginning of the next book, and I was reminded of certain revelations that I seem to have forgotten. They aren't exactly relevant to the plot. I'm thinking of Esmenet confessing that she sold her daughter into slavery because she was starving, but they are worth mentioning. It adds dimension to the character, even if it was peripheral and something that I forgot in the face of everything else, because, this is pretty dense. Another thing that I want to talk about is the end of the last book, actually, something that I didn't touch on in the last review because I was not sure that it was a real complaint. Basically, I thought that Achamian accidentally walking past Esmenet when she returned to him was a contrived plot point, and I wondered what the point of it was. I did not say anything because I figured it would make more sense later in the story, but now that I have read the next book, I still don't see the point. They find each other at the beginning of the next book, and it just seems like the last book ended that way for no reason. I mentioned that Confus doesn't feature in the story as much as I would have liked. I think the story is building to something much greater later down the line, as he is obviously planning something alongside Sirway'S, but I imagine that will be for the climax of the story. What we did get in the story was great, however. Confus was perfectly poised to take on Kells as his influence grew, and he was a formidable foe. I especially liked the final confrontation at the end of the book, when Confus made the case that Kells was a Sasharam spy. The best part about this was that while Confus was wrong and is cynical enough to lie, he wasn't actually lying. He not only believed that Kells was a spy, but he had very good reasons to believe it too. Proteus was also underutilized, and I didn't get to see him lock horns with Conphus to the extent that I thought I would, but as before, what we saw was good enough. I especially liked his manipulation of Conphus in the aftermath of an attempted assassination of Kellus. It showed that Conphus had underestimated Proteus and as a simple-minded zealot, and he needed to operate with more care. Sirway'S death was tragic, but it was nothing less than a mercy killing at this point. God's help the rest of these characters. I mentioned before that the plot was faster paced than the last book, and that is best demonstrated through the numerous battle scenes throughout. The first battle was my favorite because of just how messy and crazy the whole sequence was. Sabin had been manipulated to march ahead of the rest of the army and take on the enemy, and they were basically destined to die. But we got was much more than that. Even in the face of crushing defeat, the religious zeal of the Unrithi drove them on, and we were served with one of the most spastic and insane conflicts that I have ever read. The highlight of the fighting was when the Sasharim arrived and the Shroud Knights mobbed them by the thousands, all being wiped out with fire, until one lone knight comes spiraling out of the furnace on a flaming horse to take off the head of one of the sorcerers. I can't even remember the man's name, but by the gods is he the MVP of the story, beyond even Kellus. The march through the desert was also an amazing sequence. By far the most people died in this sequence, and even in the face of the horrifying setbacks in the earlier portions of this book, this made me wonder just how far Baker was going to push the Holy War into his final legs. I still have the image of thousands upon thousands of bodies trailing the march of men. The only real gripe I have with this is that I thought it would be a little too obvious what the Chianese were planning in this. It was explicitly acknowledged that the Chianese fleets were strangely absent, but it never crossed anyone's mind that they might be waiting for when they tried to cross the desert, that just seems blindingly obvious. The problem was kind of brushed over. I guess another minor gripe would be how Kellus found out about the waterhole. It was written to be miraculous, but that is more about the appearance. So I still think there should be an explanation. Imagine the idea is that Kellus' senses are heightened, unlike others, but I'm still fuzzy on this. I especially liked how the end of the book was still largely centered on a political conflict and a room full of men talking, as political intrigue is often derided. Just like the last book, there was a major rhetorical conflict between different factions as they made their case for the future of the Holy War. And Achaemen gets his time to shine. Of course he still loses, but he had Conphus and centuries of bias and derision against him. The fact that he managed to get people to hesitate and think it for a moment was good enough. The final battle, where the starved Unrithi confront the Kian in a fervor, was crazy. I thought it was a bit far-fetched as I went through it the first time, but then I found out the battle is based on a real-life battle called the Battle of Antioch, which is just crazy. I guess zeal can go a long way. The mysteries remain as one of the best parts of the story. Quite simply, I have no idea how the story might progress from here. Basically, anything can happen at this point, and I am so excited. I asked a number of questions in the last review, and I think they have been answered or built upon in a variety of different ways. I wondered whether Kellus' father is the real harbinger of the apocalypse. Interestingly enough, when Achaemen tells Kellus that he thinks that he is the harbinger, the monk's face changes as if something came to mind. Of course, I might be reading into this, but I could not help but wonder if Kellus was thinking the very same thing I was. Additionally, what about Kellus' son? Another Annus Rimber is entering the picture, and I wonder how this changes things. Another related point is an interesting rebuttal to the very idea of the harbinger. Kellus pointed out that it makes no sense that an Annus Rimber has arrived. The Annus Rimber line has always been here. Where is here supposed to denote, if not where the Annus Rimber line has always been? Maybe there will be an even deeper twist to this prophecy down the line that Baker has in store for us. This book confirmed that the Consult has no understanding at all of who Kellus is or even of the Dunyain. They are outright terrified of the Dunyain at this point, which makes me laugh. All this fear of the Consult and their bringing of the apocalypse, and there is this glaring wild card whipping up everything into insanity against the expectations of anyone. This book also confirmed that the consult actually does want to kill everyone, as the Synthes thought blissfully about the deaths of all living creatures. Because of this, I imagine the bit about history being written by the victors is more so related to the Dunyan and their anti-history. The consult also provides an interesting spin on things by showing that they are skeptical of the Anasarimber prophecy. This is a very strange development because the prophecy allegedly foretells the consult's own goals. At first I thought this would be something they would not even express interest in, as there would be no uncertainty for them. But I guess they would be unsure about the success of their own plans. The ultimate question is what this skepticism of this prophecy might mean for the prophecy itself. One interesting development is literally just a throwaway line that I could easily have missed. Apparently Kellis wasn't lying to Nair when he said that he had been sent to assassinate his father. He thought briefly about the mission he was sent on, and it confirmed that these were at least his orders. That said, this does not mean that Kellis himself does not have alternative motives of his own. His interior monologues do not seem to suggest that he is looking to kill his father, but to follow his lead. Indeed, there are interesting religious parallels with how Kellis thinks about his father. Another related point is that if the goal was to silence Kellis' father to keep the Dunyan hidden, this plan is not working. Kellis' presence has only brought more scrutiny on the Dunyan, with the consult now resorting to extreme ends in order to uncover their secret. Finally, I want to talk about the No-God and his portrayal in the book. From the very first pages, we get to see the rise of the No-God and even hear him speak. Here are a series of snippets. What do you see? I must know what you see. Tell me, what am I? I cannot see. I have no idea what to make of this. The No-God comes off as confused, like he had just been created and does not understand what he is or what his purpose is. He can't see. It makes him vulnerable, which contrasts his threat in ominous ways. I asked in the last review about what the console might really be up to outside of the mandate's hostile perspective, but this puts the focus on the No-God himself, making me wonder what he is all about. Finally, I also recognize the passing comment about how the non-men claim to have come from the far-flung stars, implying that they're aliens in the story. I wonder how they will be featured in the coming story. And also as an addendum, I'm reading a script, but I've finished the story at this point as I'm recording, and I just misread this. I correct it later on, but it's not the non-men, it's actually the Inkoroi that are aliens. Overall, I thought the book was amazing. I will give it a 9 out of 10.